if you look at the dates, most people think on a traditional year for the Mets, because they've not been to the playoffs quite often over the span of the last 30 years. You could usually say, like, oh, well, you can get away with scheduling the Cricket All-Stars in mid-October because the Mets aren't going to go to the playoffs, and they go to the World Series that year. So you had no choice. You had to wait until the World Series ended before you could do the game at Citi Field.
So game 5, was it? Game 6 at Citi Field. It was to be played on the Sunday. We were supposed to be playing the first match of the 3-match series the following Saturday. And the Mets organization we'd been dealing with for quite a while about setting up for cricket. And some of the meetings were quite interesting when the ground supervisor in the first meeting, when we described what we'd do, he'd say, "You're going to do what to my field?" We were going to bring semi-trailers and cranes into the middle of the Citi Field to put a drop-in pitch in there. And of course, that was to be done. We had the trucks waiting outside the city limits of New York on that Sunday night, waiting to know whether there was going to be another match. And according to the rules of hauling, the pitch that was being brought in on the truck, they weren't allowed to come into the city limits before a certain time of the day because of traffic restrictions. So they were hovering outside the area of Citi Field, and we ended up bringing them in at 2 o'clock in the morning after the match had finished, and started preparing to dig up the ground to put the pitch in. And
for people who don't know, that drop-in wicket was being prepared in Indianapolis. So this is quite an extensive operation to drive it from Indianapolis in Indiana, basically 1,000 miles east, to get it to New York City. And then only to be told, according to you, you're not allowed to enter the city limits. You got to wait outside.
That's right. So they were driving around for hours, so waiting to be called to say, yes, now you're permitted to come in and commence this duty. It was quite something. And I remember when the players, as we had them gathered, they wanted to practice on it, of course, because this whole new idea of these players being brought together for this series as a showcase for cricket in the United States, they were really concerned about the surface that they were going to play on, because they were told they were going to be playing in a baseball ground, and they were really concerned about it. So we had the wicket was put in on the Wednesday, but it was finished on the Wednesday. They could come practice on the Thursday, and we're out there. They had put nets around the actual wicket, and they were bowling on it, and watching Shoaib Akhtar bowling on that thing and Curtly Ambrose. I mean, it was just like still an eye-opener for me, just thinking back on it. And Ricky Ponting came up to me and said, "Well, you guys have done a pretty good job." And I said, "It wasn't me. It was this gentleman here. They are the famous Kiwi who built the wickets, and he also built, Peter, wicket for the Maid Park ground in Houston, as well as a separate one for Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles." So it went really well, and it's just a pity that it kind of petered out after that. But we were just surprised at the gathering of the talent there. It was a super galaxy of cricket talent.
Yeah, Mark Parham, he was the curator from New Zealand who came in. He had done work previously in the U.S. He had helped get the facility in Indianapolis up and running, the actual cricket facility there, not the indoor facility where he was doing the drop-in wicket preparation, but there's a separate facility called World Sports Park on the east side of Indianapolis. And he was heavily involved in the design and the cultivation of that facility, the outfield and the square itself. And it's a shame that facility doesn't get used anymore, because I felt it was one of the best facilities.
Obviously, baseball grounds aren't the ideal venues for cricket, but at the time they needed places where they could attract a crowd to kind of pay for it. Now, really, we looked at everywhere around the US, at various grounds, but the baseball ground seemed to be the place to do it. And funnily enough, the people at Citi Field were really good, but they wouldn't let us remove the pitcher's mound. So it was covered over with a logo, a tarped logo. Now, in Minute Maid Park, they didn't care. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. You can move it. So it was quite interesting seeing the attitude towards what we were doing from the different grounds that we played it on.
Well, you have to keep in mind, at that point in time, the Mets were in the World Series. The Mets were the best team in the National League. They won the pennant. People forget this. At that point in time, the Astros were the worst team in baseball.
Yeah.
So, in really a short space of time, in the space of 3 years, basically, they went from being one of the worst teams in baseball to being a World Series winner and a consistent winner, or a team appearing in the World Series.
With the help of certain cameras,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
they had a little bit of sleight of hand there.
Yeah.
But the point is, the mentality changes. Yeah, when you're a last place team and you're losing 100 games like they were in the early part of the 2010s, you don't mind so much if people are altering your field if it brings in revenue.
The people at Citi Field, the funny thing was, we go out to do a survey where I had to walk around the outfield or the warning track to know where we're going to put the cameras. And I went to step out onto the grass to look back to get a perspective view. And the security guys there said, "You are not permitted to set foot on this grass unless you're a major league player." And I went, "Oh, okay, well, you don't know what's going to happen here later in the week when we're doing clinics for 300 kids," because we literally had a couple of hundred kids there from various schools around New York City doing clinics with some of these great cricketers.
Yep.
And Citi Field was covered with people. And so I thought it was a little bit odd that, 2 days before I wasn't allowed to set foot on the grass because it was hallowed ground for major league players only. And of course, I didn't quite make major league level. Yeah.
This is where Benny Agbayani once ran around.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, and of course, then the Pepsi sign in right field.
Yeah, was
this one of the landmarks of New York City at the time.
The Pepsi porch.
Pepsi porch, and of course, we were out there practicing. We were doing pieces with Matty Hayden and Andrew Simons, and they were hitting balls over the Pepsi sign. So the Citi Field people were like aghast. They thinking, "Oh man, this is good." So they had to go out and take another $5 million worth of insurance out on that Pepsi sign because they were worried that it was going to get hit with cricket balls. So it had never, obviously, no one ever gets near it playing baseball, but you got guys get like, Andrew Simons, as you know, can launch them. So that was an interesting aspect of it too. They had no idea how hard these guys hit the ball.
And if you think about it just from a contextual standpoint, in a baseball game, you might clear it a couple times a game. And in batting practice, at that point in time, Yoenis Cespedes was like the king of the Mets that season and when they went to the World Series. And so, you go to batting practice, you see Yoenis Cespedes trying to hit however many home runs in batting practice, and you've got fans out there. But you've got people intercepting these objects, all trying to catch a home run ball. And so the actual prospect of there being damage to the facility doesn't really exist. Whereas if it's in an empty stadium in a training session like that, all of a sudden, or in a game itself, where instead of it being 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 home runs over the course of a game, if the boundaries are short because the cricket dimensions are different, and you've got 15, 20, 36s potentially providing damage to these structures, it makes sense that they might need to take out extra insurance.
Well, Maid Park was slightly different. If people watching this who are familiar with Maid Park know that every time there's a home run hit there's a guy out there in this little train that goes backwards and forwards, celebrating the home run. So they thought it'd be a cool idea to do that every time one of our guys hit a 6. So
I remember he was busy. He was very, very busy.
It all went off. The thing broke down halfway through the match because there were so many 6s being hit. So that was interesting. I think we broke the train.